The royal chamber, with its spiraling crystalline walls and shimmering constellations etched into the ceiling, was eerily quiet as Princess Zalith sat alone on the raised dais. She stared down at the cold, polished floor, her hands resting lightly on her lap. In the ancient days, her ancestors would have used their telepathic abilities to project their presence, bending even the most reluctant of suitors to their will. But Zalith had no such gift. Instead, she relied on wit, strategy, and an intelligence honed by years of scrutiny, qualities the noble houses of Varenthra seemed determined to overlook. A hush swept over the grand hall as the chamber doors slid open. The counselors, a semicircle of stoic figures in flowing robes, turned their gazes toward the entrance. Zalitha's uncle, High Chancellor Trefx, stepped forward. Behind him, flanked by 2 Varenthran guards, was the human emissary, Jack Thompson. Jack's presence was almost jarring amidst the ethereal splendor of Varenthran architecture. Where Varenthrans exuded an otherworldly grace, with their tall, slender forms and skin that seemed to shimmer faintly in the low light, Jack was unmistakably human, solid, broad-shouldered, and with the faint lines of Earth's gravity etched into his features. His tailored black diplomat suit looked out of place, its plainness a stark contrast to the flowing, luminous fabrics worn by those around him. Jack paused a moment to take in the chamber's splendor before stepping forward with a practiced air of calm. As he approached the dais, his sharp eyes flicked toward Zalith. She met his gaze and lifted her chin, schooling her expression into the calm neutrality that had become her shield. It was difficult to tell what he thought of her, but he did not falter. "Your Highness," Jack began, bowing slightly. His voice, though measured, carried the faint gravel of someone who had seen and endured more than the polished halls of diplomacy. "I thank you for receiving me. I've heard much of Varenthra's beauty, but words truly don't do it justice." Zalith inclined her head, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "You are most welcome, Ambassador Thompson. Varenthra is honored by your presence." As the customary pleasantries unfolded, she studied him carefully. What she saw was not what she expected. Unlike the arrogant Varenthran nobles who had come before, Jack didn't exude an air of superiority. Instead, he seemed entirely focused, as if he viewed the situation not as a mere political maneuver, but as a challenge worth his full attention. The intensity in his gaze reminded her of the ancient sculptures that adorned the palace, weathered yet unyielding. When the formalities concluded, the counselors stepped back, leaving Zalith and Jack to speak privately. They moved to a more intimate chamber, where a simple round table and 2 seats awaited. The room was dimly lit, casting soft shadows across the walls. "I'll be direct," Jack said as they took their seats. "I know what you're asking of me, and I understand why it's unconventional. But I need to understand something." "Why me?" Zalith hesitated for only a moment before answering. "Because you are not one of them," she said quietly. "You don't see me as a failed telepath or a disgrace to the throne. I've read about your career, your work with alien civilizations. You've brokered peace where there was only war, and you've built trust where none existed. I believe you can see me for what I am, not for what I lack." Jack leaned back, studying her. "And what is it you want from me, truly? A political alliance? A shield against the nobles?" "More than that," Zalith said, her voice gaining strength. "I need someone who believes in the idea of a future where the old rules don't dictate every aspect of our lives. A partner who sees the potential in what we could build together. This isn't just about marriage, it's about challenging a system that's crushed countless others like me." For a long moment, Jack didn't respond. He seemed to be weighing her words, measuring their sincerity. Then he nodded slowly. "I won't lie to you. This is the last thing I expected when I accepted this invitation. But I know what it's like to be underestimated. To be told you don't belong. If you're serious about changing things, about building something new, I might be willing to help." Zalitha's heart raced. "You would consider this?" "I'm not making promises yet," he said with a faint smile. "But I'll consider it. On one condition." "What condition?" she asked, her voice steady despite her nerves. "Honesty," Jack said simply. If we do this, I need to know you're not just using me as a pawn. I've been in politics long enough to know when I'm being played. If you're straight with me, I'll consider being straight with you. Deal? Zalith met his gaze, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded. Deal. In that moment, amidst the swirling uncertainties of their unlikely alliance, something shifted. Zalith and Jack, though from vastly different worlds, began to understand that they might share something rare, a mutual determination to defy expectations and carve a new path forward. The announcement of Princess Zalitha's betrothal to a human diplomat spread through the noble houses of Varenthra like a shockwave. The court's reaction was immediate and overwhelmingly hostile. In the opulent halls of the palace, where shimmering tapestries depicted the heroic telepathic feats of past monarchs, whispers turned into murmurs, and murmurs erupted into outright indignation. For centuries, Varenthran royals had married those who could amplify their powers, ensuring that each generation would be more formidable than the last. Zalitha's proposal to wed Jack Thompson, a human completely devoid of telepathic ability, struck at the heart of this tradition. As Zalith and Jack navigated the halls of the palace together, the stares were unavoidable. Tall, elegant courtiers with glowing skin and flowing robes stood in clusters, their discussions ceasing whenever the pair walked past. Some pretended to bow, their gestures exaggerated and mocking. Others didn't bother with pretense, their disdainful glares sharp enough to pierce through the thick walls of diplomacy that Jack had spent years perfecting. "Do you ever feel like a pariah?" Jack muttered under his breath as they passed yet another group of sneering nobles. "Welcome to my world," Zalith replied, her voice low but steady. She held her head high, her expression calm, but Jack noticed her grip on the small crystal brooch pinned to her dress had tightened. It was a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but one that revealed the immense pressure she carried. One evening, the two found themselves at a formal reception held in honor of the upcoming union. The grand banquet hall sparkled with refracted starlight streaming through crystalline windows. A small orchestra played, their haunting melodies filling the air. Servants moved gracefully between the guests, offering trays of exotic delicacies. Despite the splendor, the atmosphere was suffocating. As Zalith and Jack entered, the room seemed to pause. Every noble present turned to look at them. A low murmur rippled through the crowd before the conversations resumed, louder this time, with an edge of barely concealed contempt. "Princess," one nobleman said, stepping forward. He was tall even by Varenthran standards, his ornate robe encrusted with shimmering stones that signified his family's long-standing power. His name was Lord Velrex, and his reputation for enforcing tradition was well known. "I hope you will forgive my candor, but this arrangement. It is difficult for many of us to accept." Jack started to speak, but Zalith raised a hand, cutting him off. She looked directly at Velrex. "Difficult for whom, my lord? You? Or the countless commoners who have written to me expressing their hope that a marriage like this might finally break the old cycles?" Velrex stiffened. "Your Highness, it is not only the aristocracy that feels concerned. The Varenthran people expect strength from their rulers." A union with someone he glanced at Jack so different might be seen as a sign of weakness. "You mean it challenges your idea of strength," Zalith replied, her tone sharp enough to draw the attention of several nearby guests. "If this court defines strength solely by telepathic power, then perhaps it is time we reconsider what strength truly means." The murmur in the room grew louder. Zalith held Velrex's gaze until he finally stepped back, his jaw tight. Jack, watching the exchange, felt a flicker of admiration. Zalith might be surrounded by scorn, but she refused to cower. Still, he knew this was far from over. Later that night, Jack found Zalith on one of the palace's balconies. The cool air was a relief after the stifling heat of the reception. She stood alone, gazing out at the sprawling city below. Its towering spires glimmered in the darkness, their lights reflected in the endless ocean beyond. "You're awfully calm, considering," Jack said as he approached. She didn't turn, but a small smile touched her lips. "Calm is the only option I have," she replied. "If I show weakness, they'll use it against me." If I lash out, they'll call me unfit to rule. And if I walk away. She trailed off, her smile fading. Jack leaned on the balcony railing beside her. If you walk away, they win. Yes. She looked at him now, her piercing blue eyes studying his face. And you? How are you handling all of this? He shrugged, offering a faint grin. I've been through worse. But I won't lie, your people make Earth's diplomats look downright friendly. I feel like I'm one wrong word away from starting a war. Zalith laughed softly, the sound unexpected. You're not alone in that feeling, believe me. For a moment, the tension between them eased. They stood in silence, both looking out over the city. Then Zalith said, almost to herself, it's not just about me anymore. If we succeed, it changes everything. Not just for me, but for every Verintran who has ever felt they didn't belong. For those who've been silenced or shunned because they don't fit the mold. That's why I'm doing this. Jack glanced at her, the faint lines of weariness on her face. You know, he said quietly, for what it's worth, I think they're wrong about you. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. And what do you think I am? A hell of a lot stronger than any of them, he said simply. That's why I'm still here. I'm not sure where this will lead, but you've got more backbone than anyone I've met, human or otherwise. If you think this is worth fighting for, then I'm willing to stand with you. Her gaze softened. Thank you, Jack. They stayed there a while longer, two unlikely allies finding a sliver of peace in the face of overwhelming disdain. But they both knew the road ahead would be no easier. The court's contempt ran deep, and their enemies were only beginning to reveal themselves. In the weeks following the formal announcement of their engagement, Zalith and Jack found themselves at the center of a political storm. The old aristocracy, entrenched in centuries of tradition, launched every tool at their disposal to sabotage the Union. It began with the subtle undermining whisper campaign spreading doubts about Jack's loyalty, Zalith's competence, and the very idea that a non-telepath could ever be more than a liability. Then, the attacks grew more overt. One morning, as Jack prepared for yet another meeting with the High Council, his attendant hurried into the room, visibly shaken. Ambassador, she said, your transport has been sabotaged. Jack's brow furrowed. Sabotaged how? The hover thrusters were tampered with, she replied. Had you boarded it as planned, it would have failed mid-flight. Jack's first thought was not of his own safety, but of Zalith. He strode quickly to her private chambers, finding her deep in conversation with her chief advisor. When he explained what had happened, her face turned pale. They're escalating, she said, her voice tight with controlled fury. This was meant as a warning. Warning or not, it nearly killed me, Jack said. We need to expose whoever is behind this. Zalith nodded. Agreed. But we must proceed carefully. The moment we accuse the wrong house, they'll claim it's a desperate ploy to silence opposition. We need proof. Together, they began to unravel the threads of the conspiracy. Jack brought his human ingenuity and investigative experience to bear, while Zalith used her deep understanding of Verintran politics. She knew how to navigate the labyrinth of noble rivalries and alliances, and together they began identifying those who had the most to lose if the marriage succeeded. It wasn't long before they uncovered a pattern. The sabotage attempts, the rumors, and even the assassination attempt at their betrothal ceremony all traced back to a powerful faction within the aristocracy led by Lord Velrix, the same noble who had challenged Zalith at the reception. Velrix and his allies saw Zalith's union with a human not only as a disgrace but also as a threat to their influence. If a non-telepathic princess could ascend to the throne, their monopoly on power rooted in their telepathic abilities would begin to crumble. But exposing Velrix wasn't easy. He was careful, always keeping several layers of deniability between himself and the plots against Zalith and Jack. It was Jack who proposed a daring plan. If we can bait him into acting again, Jack suggested, we might be able to catch him red-handed. But it would mean putting ourselves in danger. Zalith considered this. And if we fail, the backlash could be devastating. I know, Jack said. But right now, they're winning. We need to show them we won't back down. It took weeks of meticulous planning, during which both Jack and Zalith endured increasing hostility. Velrex and his allies doubled down on their efforts, planting false evidence to discredit the princess and spreading claims that Jack was a secret agent from Earth, sent to destabilize Varenthra. The pressure was unrelenting, yet each new attack only strengthened their resolve. Finally, their trap was set. During a public event celebrating the founding of the royal line, Jack and Zalith staged a moment of vulnerability. Jack presented a rare diplomatic token from Earth, an artifact that symbolized peace and unity, and placed it on display. It was well known that Velrex despised Earth's influence and would see the artifact as an affront to Varenthran sovereignty. Sure enough, the next day, the artifact was stolen and replaced with a crude forgery. The security footage, carefully monitored by Zalith's trusted allies, revealed Velrex's agents carrying out the theft. With the evidence in hand, Zalith and Jack confronted the High Council. The aristocracy was forced to witness the recordings, and even those sympathetic to Velrex could not deny what they saw. Under pressure, Velrex's co-conspirators began to turn on him, providing additional testimony about the sabotage attempts. It was a stunning reversal. The very faction that had sought to destroy them now found itself in disgrace. Though the court would never fully embrace the idea of a human prince consort, the immediate threat to Zalith's reign had been neutralized. The investigation and public humiliation of Velrex and his allies sent a clear message: Zalith and Jack were not to be underestimated. They had not only survived the storm but emerged stronger for it. As the dust settled, Zalith turned to Jack and said, "You took an enormous risk." Jack shrugged, a faint grin on his face. "You wanted proof. We got it. And besides, I figured I owed you one after you kept me alive this long." She smiled at him, a rare moment of warmth breaking through her usually composed exterior. "We owe each other, Jack. This is just the beginning." With their newfound unity and the respect they had earned through their trials, Zalith and Jack were ready to face whatever came next. But they knew all too well that the path ahead would be as fraught as the one they had just traversed. Still, for the first time, it felt as though they were walking it together. The royal wedding drew near, and with it came the final battle to secure not only Zalith and Jack's union but also their shared vision for Varenthra's future. The court was no longer openly hostile after the exposure of Velrex's conspiracy. Few dared to speak out too loudly against the princess. But the wounds left by centuries of rigid hierarchy were far from healed, and whispers of dissent still lingered in the grand halls of the palace. For Zalith, each step toward the ceremony felt like a climb up a mountain. The nobles might have been subdued for the moment, but she knew their resentment would not simply vanish. Some saw her wedding as a temporary embarrassment, a political stunt that would soon be undone. Others, more dangerously, viewed it as a sign that the royal house was growing weak, and whispers of rebellion simmered beneath the surface. Jack, meanwhile, faced his own trials. The weight of representing Earth in this delicate alliance bore down on him. The pressure to not only prove his loyalty to Zalith, but also demonstrate his worth as a partner in governance was immense. Every meeting, every public appearance, and every word he spoke was scrutinized. Yet the bond he had forged with Zalith strengthened him. He saw the fire in her, the unyielding determination that had carried her through years of rejection. It inspired him to stand taller, to push harder. The wedding itself was set to take place in the royal nexus, the ancient ceremonial chamber at the heart of the palace. The nexus, a vast dome of refracted starlight and crystalline pillars, was where Varenthran monarchs had been crowned for millennia. Now it would serve as the stage for a union that might reshape the entire society. As the ceremony began, Zalith and Jack stood side by side at the altar, their hands lightly clasped. The gathered nobles, dignitaries, and emissaries watched in tense silence. Even those who supported the marriage knew that its success was uncertain. What would happen once the vows were spoken? Would the court truly accept this alliance? Could a human consort ever hold a legitimate place within the royal hierarchy? But as the officiant, a high elder from a neutral noble house, began to speak the ancient vows, something unexpected occurred. A faction of nobles, those who had kept their allegiances hidden after Velrex's fall, rose from their seats. They moved as one, stepping forward, their ornate robes glittering under the starlight. At first, it seemed they were going to object formally, as tradition allowed. But then, in a shocking breach of protocol, they drew ceremonial blades and aimed them directly at Zalith and Jack. Chaos erupted. Zalitha's guards surged forward, intercepting the would-be assassins, while the nobles who had remained neutral scattered, uncertain whether to run or intervene. Jack instinctively stepped in front of Zalith, shielding her from harm, but the princess quickly moved to his side. She had no telepathic abilities, no enhanced reflexes or superhuman strength, but she had spent her entire life fighting to be seen as equal. She wasn't about to let her wedding day end in bloodshed. In the midst of the melee, Zalith did something unexpected. She spoke not with the regal authority of a princess, but with the sharp, cutting voice of someone who had endured years of scorn. Enough! Her voice rang through the nexus, amplified by the acoustics of the Great Dome. The combatants froze. Even the most hardened nobles turned to look at her. "Is this what you truly want?" she demanded, her gaze sweeping over the assembled court. "Another generation of division? Another cycle of endless fighting, all because you cannot accept that strength comes in many forms? I have lived my entire life under your judgment. I have been called weak, unworthy, and unfit. But I am still here. I have fought harder than any of you to stand in this place. And I will not allow you to destroy what we are building." The room fell silent. Even the rebels, still holding their blades, hesitated. Jack saw his moment and stepped forward, addressing them directly. "You think you're defending tradition, but all you're doing is protecting a system that fears change. You call me an outsider. Fine. I am. But what I've learned from Zalith is that your people, your entire society, can be so much more. Together, we can create a future where no one is cast aside, where no one is forced to fight alone. Or you can keep tearing yourselves apart." For a long, tense moment, it seemed as though no one would move. Then, one by one, the rebels lowered their weapons. The guards took them into custody, and order was restored. The ceremony resumed, and Zalith and Jack exchanged their vows before the assembled court. When the officiant proclaimed them united, a ripple of uncertain applause spread through the room. It was not the thunderous celebration of a traditional royal wedding, but it was something. A start. In the weeks that followed, Zalith and Jack began their joint rule in earnest. They implemented reforms to break the stranglehold of the old noble houses, creating opportunities for those who had been excluded from power. They encouraged dialogue between Varenthra and Earth, strengthening bonds that had long been tenuous. And though resistance remained, small pockets of rebellion and whispered dissent, their efforts slowly began to shift the tide. Zalith and Jack's marriage became a symbol. Not a perfect solution or an end to all conflict, but a powerful statement that change was possible. They were two individuals who had refused to conform, who had stood together against the tide of tradition, and who now faced the uncertain future as partners. As the months turned to years, their story spread far beyond the Andromeda cluster. On Earth and on Varenthra, they became a legend not just of a princess who defied her court, or of a human who dared to marry into an alien dynasty, but of the strength that comes from embracing differences, and the courage it takes to build a new order.